and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker joining me via Skype, and we are in for it today as we are going to begin our previews of the 2023-24 season, and we're going to start that off with the Central Division. We'll just start running through teams. Who knows? You know, Justin, sometimes we knock a whole division out in one episode, and sometimes we just have to come back to it later because we expend our time. So, but before we jump into that, Justin, give me a quick, how was your summer?
My summer, wow, that's.
I feel like probably some people, they kind of check out of the hockey stuff, right? Like, once, this episode will get posted on. You're probably listening to this, maybe the 30th, 31st of August, but essentially the very beginning of September. I feel like this is the time you're like, oh, it's September. Oh, I'm going to start thinking about hockey again, right? So for those who have missed all the fantastic top tens we've done throughout the summer, how's your summer been?
Man, summer's been busy. Just a lot of house renovations. I'll be honest with you. As summer's been kind of wrapping up, right? I mean, we got Labor Day weekend approaching, so that to me is usually the signal. Kids going back to school, summer's over, that kind of thing. I have my sister and brother-in-law flying in from Arizona to spend time with some family over here, that kind of stuff. I think they have some, my brother-in-law's side of the family, they got some things they need to do, which is why they're coming in. However, that Sunday before Labor Day, they rented out an ice rink for an hour and a half because my nephew plays hockey. He's a 6-year-old, prodigy. We'll call him that, whatever. Probably not, but my sister asked me to bust out the goalie pads, and I'll be honest with you, I was looking at those last week, and I have not actually been between the pipes in it's been probably 3 years now.
You have gone back since you hurt yourself, right?
Yes, since I broke my ankles about 4 years ago, I did go back. I've been back a few times, and it's totally fine.
Okay, all right. So you're same old, other than being old.
Just out of game shape. Let's just put it that way.
Some might say you're on the wrong side of 30.
Hey, if you know what, you could refer to me as Tim Thomas, and I think we'll be okay.
There you go. Go win a Stanley Cup now, and you'll be set. That's perfect. Yeah. It's crazy that I feel like this summer for us in Michigan has been probably one of the more mild summers that I can ever remember. We really haven't had crazy hot weather like some of the rest of the country has had. But it's been pretty enjoyable. I like it, especially since I feel like I'm not like a go to the lake all the time person, so I don't really care if it's just 78. If I was at a lake, I'd be like, oh man, it's only 76 today. What the hell? But in my backyard, it's fine. It works out.
Exactly.
All right. So on our show today, as we sort of kick off the 2023-24 season, we're going to preview this Central Division. And I feel as though maybe it's fitting that we go backwards through the standings from last season. Are you cool with that?
Ooh, okay. I like a little switcheroo.
We'll start with the worst of this division, which I before the show I promptly named the butthole of the NHL, Central Division. You thought maybe it was the Pacific, but my reasoning, Central Division, I feel like there's quite a few teams that are going to probably get worse. Not that they're not necessarily going to be bad, or not that there's not going to be some playoff teams, but I'm not sure that too many teams in this division got tremendously better. And that's my take on the division. But yeah, maybe some of that will come out as we go through this. But what do you think overall of the Central Division? What's your thoughts?
I mean, gosh, there are some Stanley Cup contenders at the top, but some real garbage teams at the bottom, right? It's pretty easy just to point out Chicago, right? I mean, I think that's where we're starting, and just say, hey, you know what? The next superstar just arrived, and boy, that's really where my first thoughts go when I think of the Central, right? Can Colorado get back to Stanley Cup contention, and can Connor Bedard be that guy that they all expect him to be? So for me, that's really it for the Central as far as I'm caring.
Yeah, and I guess when we're talking about the bottom, and like the Blackhawks last season with 59 points, I think they were third to last in the league, second to last, kind of tied second to last with Columbus. Chicago was bad, right? Chicago was just, I mean, aside from a bunch of OT losses that helped them a little bit, they were terrible. So in my mind, it's really hard to be like, well, they've gotten better, because of course, like, there aren't too many teams that have historically terrible seasons 2 years in a row. Like, you can be bad 2 years in a row, but usually you're not like dead last 2 years in a row. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I think Chicago, it's just easy to get better when you're that freaking terrible. But when I look at the roster, I think about this from like the beginning of 2022-23 to the beginning of this season. You've lost Patrick Kane. Theoretically, you've also lost Jonathan Toews. I know he wasn't really healthy enough last year to make a big difference, but going into the year, you thought like a healthy Kane, a healthy Toews. Let's see what, at least maybe they'll do something, and maybe it'll make them halfway decent until they trade them. Well, they were both kind of banged up quite a bit throughout the year. But if you think about the team at the beginning of last year to the beginning of this year, who do I want more, Taylor Hall or Patrick Kane? I'm taking Patrick Kane, at least a healthy one. And who do I want more, Toews or are we comparing to Toews? Foligno? I think I'll take Jonathan Toews when he's healthy. So I think from the beginning of last year to the beginning of this year, yeah, they added Connor Bedard, but there really isn't a whole lot else that I'm super excited about with this team. So I think they'll probably just be meh again. They're going to try to lose again, and it'll be as much of a growth experience for Bedard. But do you see this team's taking a step further than like I don't even know a scenario where they don't finish last in the Central. That's how bad I think they are.
No, I agree with you. I mean, we'll talk about Arizona, right? The team above them in the standings. I think there is reason to believe they'll be better. But as far as Chicago is concerned, there's not much there to make me think they'll be that much better because of the two names you just mentioned, right? Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They spent a majority of last season with the Chicago Blackhawks. So they had that production there, albeit they were in and out with injuries, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, what are you replacing it with, right? Taylor Hall and Connor Bedard. And in my opinion, I don't think Connor Bedard, I think he is going to be a superstar in this league at some point. However, I think next season, he's not going to be the Calder Trophy winner, in my opinion.
But I feel like we're still probably talking like a 60 to 70 point season is definitely within reach.
Yeah, I'm going 30-30 right now for this guy. That's where I'm at, and
that would be successful for a season.
Absolutely would be, absolutely, and he'll probably be in the top 3 of the Calder final voting, which would be great for Chicago. But you have to. There's going to be a big learning curve for him. As much as a franchise-altering player as people make him out to be, he still has to go through this learning curve. What it's like to play in the NHL, and unlike a lot of teams where, like for example, if he had gone to any other team like Anaheim, right?
Columbus or something.
Well, yeah, like if he had gone to Anaheim, for example, right? They at least would have had Troy Terry or Trevor Zegras. They could have put him
right.
Put in
Columbus
front of him in the lineup
with Johnny Gaudreau, or like you have this high end other player to play with.
Right. There's other talent in front of him where teams' top defensive units can focus on. Right. But here in Chicago, like he's it. He's the only high end talent with Taylor Hall, and I assume they're going to be paired together on a line. So you have to assume every single time he steps on the ice, guess who's going on the ice with him? Victor Hedman or Charlie McAvoy or any of the other team's top-end defensemen. And that's who's got to play.
There's also nothing to say that, sometimes these, I don't know how Luke Richardson's going to coach this team with Bedard. Sometimes you're not going to put Bedard out against top competition maybe right away. Maybe you do. You're going to see how he responds in camp and how he does in some of these preseason games.
Sure.
But, he might be their third-line center for a while. And that would be totally fine, if you're mainly giving that defensive responsibility to, I guess Tyler Johnson or Jason Dickinson, Athanasiou. Yeah, I mean, I guess the tough part is that Bedard really is their only pure center. And so that could make things a little interesting. I that maybe is, maybe I just answer my own question that like maybe they don't really have the personnel to put him as a third line center. Just throw him to the wolves, see what happens.
I mean, the fans won't let it happen, right? I mean, you got to think.
Sure. Yeah,
they'll be calling for blood.
That too. Well, and this is Luke Richardson's second full season with the team, so you hope that they can take some kind of step forward, at least be exciting, and I think they will be that. I think that there's a reason to tune in and watch a Blackhawks game. I think there's a chance they could have some high-scoring affairs because they may open things up. And my goodness, like their defense is truly not much more than a fence to skate around. Like that's kind of, they're just not that great. I mean,
a fence.
Hey, you got some young guys coming up, Wyatt Kaiser, but I mean, Zaitsev, Connor Murphy, Seth Jones, Jared Tenorti, those guys in your somewhere in your top four scattered around. And that's just, I don't know what they're going to look like from a forward perspective, but I know from a defensive perspective, it's going to be quite rough. And the thing I worry about for Bedard is there anybody from the defensive side that can get him the puck? Aside from Seth Jones, which, Seth Jones offensively, yeah, I mean, he put up 51 points 2 years ago, 37 last year with I'd say a worse team than the year before. So, I mean, I think that with Seth Jones feeding you the puck, you've got a chance. But other than that, it's going to be real tough pickings from a defensive side, which really does feed the rest of that forward group. And then God knows Mrazek's not going to stop much.
Yeah, that's the kicker, right? I mean, you've got Mrazek and Soderblom back there, and don't get me wrong, I think Mrazek's a decent goaltender, but he's a backup. Let's just be honest. That's what he is. And Soderblom, I don't have a lot of faith in this kid, and I haven't really seen much to make me think otherwise. I mean, yes, he played with a terrible Blackhawks team last year, but I don't know.
I guess the other side of it is, what are you excited about this team? Obviously Bedard, but also on a I guess a lesser note a little bit, you're looking for Lucas Reichel to be able to come in and make an impact. Last year, 15 points in the 23 games he did get into, but 51 points in 55 games down in Rockford in the AHL. I mean, he's definitely somebody you're probably expecting to make the team this year. And I think that's probably the things that are going to get you excited as a Blackhawks fan is, can some of your draft picks make an impact this year?
Yep, that's the big question mark. Can the young kids come up and take another step, right? Because that's what you're hoping. So in 2 or 3 years, you hope that they progressed enough to where Connor Bedard is now officially a star in this league, and you can go out and attract some big name free agents and maybe start to make yourself into a contender again.
Yep. And hey, sometimes these things can turn around more quickly than you think because you draft well, you hit on a couple extra guys, and things kind of move more quickly. Can last year's first round pick for Chicago, 7th overall, Kevin Krasinski, can he come up, make an impact, and sneak onto that blue line? That would be he's definitely their best defensive prospect. So that would be, I think, unlikely. You're probably looking at him going, well, you played in the WHL last year. He put up great numbers, but you're probably hoping that he can go play in the World Juniors again. And you're going to, just allow him to develop in the minor or in juniors once more, because there's not a whole lot for him, I don't think, in Chicago. And that's the hard part at the beginning of a rebuild is you're like, oh, cool. Well, maybe our younger guys will get a shot. Well, they probably won't, because you don't want to destroy their careers by making them think they suck when it's just really the team just isn't ready for them. So, I mean, there's lots certainly that will be coming down the pipeline. Also, Frank Nazar last year as well, drafted in the first round. So there's a couple good players coming for Chicago, but that's just going to be a minute. What do we think in Chicago is probably bottom of the barrel here? You think they're finishing last?
Yeah. I absolutely would say they are going to be dead last in this division, no doubt.
Okay, yeah. All right, let's move on to the Arizona Coyotes, who, my goodness, they have stocked up on some draft picks, so they are ready to be bad again, but also hoping that a few other teams are bad so they get better picks. But I actually think maybe out of these Central Division teams, they did get better, right? Like, at least they added the names to make them a little more interesting. They were just not interesting at all last year. There's really nothing, like, no reason to watch the Arizona Coyotes. And at least they brought in some players that can play in the NHL.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. They've got guys that can play versus a team like Chicago, which is full of people who have not been in the NHL much, right? I think half their team is full of, rookies and young guns, but
and just guys who are kind of bottom of the barrel, like just filling in gaps for you. Whereas Arizona goes out and they bring in Zucker, who is a big crowd favorite in Pittsburgh, and you bring in Kerfoot from Toronto, kind of just that Swiss Army knife type of player, and Logan Cooley actually signs with you. That was a miracle in and of itself.
Right.
That he was willing to sign that deal. That was a big deal. And then you also, Dylan Gunther, you're expecting him to make the team. Like, there are some exciting forwards on this team that might make an impact and help this team to move up in the standings, dare I say it.
Yeah, and the other part, right, when you look at other guys on the back end that they brought in, Sean Durzi, Matt Dumba, these are all a lot of young names that I think are going to Matt Dumba, for me, I thought was super key. A great acquisition this offseason because, losing Jacob Chikrin, you pretty much lost your number one,
right.
Veteran guy back there, granted at, 24, 25. I don't know if you call him a veteran, but the rest of their blue line is pretty young. I mean, you've got Victor Soderstrom, Vamelke on that back end, and Sean Durzi still relatively young. So there's a lot of potential there. And guys that I think are going to be better. Sean Durzi, to me, is going to be a big piece for this team because I think he showed a lot of potential in LA, but just was backlogged by the other defensemen ahead of him that shoot right. So I think there's a big opportunity for him to see some top line minutes here in the top four with Matt Dumba and likely Vamelke. So this could turn out to be just a steal for Arizona. And, again, you mentioned a lot of those names up front and bringing other guys like, Kerfoot and Jason Zucker. I think this team's going to look a lot better, in my opinion. And furthermore, on the back end, when you look at this, the goaltending duo back there, I really like what they've got in net too. So there's a lot that looks promising, not only for the now, but for the next 3 or 4 years for this team.
Yeah, here's what I'm wondering about Karel Vamelka, who has really played quite well for a team that's been just hasn't given him a whole lot to play with in front of him. A 900 save percentage for my money with that team that was there last year is pretty darn good. I always wonder how well someone's going to play when there's real pressure or like some real expectations on you, like, hey, we're a little bit better. Now it's your turn to get a little bit better. Does that player get better, or have they just played really well because they're getting tons of shots and it makes them look better than they really are? Because everybody goes, well, I mean, nobody's going to save those things, and suddenly there's just that pressure, and we've seen it before where a goalie, it looks promising, he's on a bad team and we excuse the bad team part, and then the team gets better and he doesn't really get much better. So I think there is that aspect I wonder about, but when I look at Chicago's defense and I look at Arizona's defense, I'm a lot more excited about Arizona's. At least there's some things happening. Dumba, hey, at very least Dumba is somebody that they can flip at the deadline. I mean, who wouldn't want Matt Dumba at $1.85 million going into the playoffs? I'm almost positive that he will be traded. He has no trade clauses or no move clauses or anything. None of those in the contract. So he definitely will be moved at the deadline, barring a freaking miracle here by the Coyotes. But I wouldn't say that I'm super excited to watch this team, but there is a reason to tune in now. You know, I want to see how the Cooley Gunther kind of combination might work out for them. And yeah, I think they actually might score some goals. And that's the biggest thing, is that they were just so bad offensively that it made them almost unwatchable. And now, at least with some offense, I think this team could be okay. And if we can get Jacob Voracek, Shea Weber, and Brian Little to come back in their primes, then they'll be really good. Really good. They're on the IR for this team, by the way. 22 million. And I think Weber's contract $7.8 million against the cap, and they're paying him $1 million.
Right.
So they're paying him $1 million for a nice cap hit so that they don't have to spend their own money.
Yeah, that must be nice. I will say though, this Arizona team, to me, I think a lot of these guys, that you think like the Jason Zuckers, the Matt Dumbas, if Arizona comes out and they look promising, especially with a lot of younger guys like Cooley and Gunther coming in here, they could potentially convince these guys to stick around long term. I mean, yes, we don't know what's really going on with the arena situation and whether or not they're going to be there. But I think for a guy like, for example, Matt Dumba, who, we all thought would have, received probably a longer term, higher salary deal going in this offseason because, right-handed defensemen are at a premium, and he was one of the top defensive, signings available, and it just didn't work out for him. So maybe he realizes, you know what, I could probably cash in here, make a few more bucks, get to hang out somewhere nice and warm in Arizona. It's a great place to live. So maybe I might sign here long term.
Minnesota, probably, at least in terms of living there.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I that is a good point. I tend to lean still there. Actually, it's crazy that they have no defensemen signed after this year. Few UFAs, few RFAs. I would expect that Jason Zucker is another one of those names that could potentially get moved at the deadline, and Travis Boyd as well. Like the likelihood of a lot of these players that are on expiring contracts get dealt at the deadline, I think is pretty high. But yeah, maybe one of those guys sticks around. I mean, you gotta sport a team, so it's possible one of them sticks around. But I would think that Matt Dumba will be in pretty high regard as long as he's having a solid year. If he's having a John Klingberg kind of year, yeah, maybe not. But I think Matt Dumba at 29 years old is still going to be sought after pretty hard come deadline. So your prediction on Arizona, we don't have to necessarily give our playoff predictions right now. I feel like there's a lot to see before we can really give a playoff prediction. But as far as, do you see this team getting better? I mean, they were kind of in a weird place last year. Everybody below them had 60, 59, 58 points, 59. Like they were almost in this little area by themselves up there with 70 points. And I think one other team is sort of close to them, and the Montreal Canadiens with 68. But they're sort of in this very middling. They weren't horrible. Surprisingly enough, they weren't horrible, but and they were actually worse after the deadline because they lost a few guys. But they weren't good, and I don't see them. Do we see them in the 80-point mark somewhere around there this year?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely reasonable because I do think the next three teams we're going to talk about in this division are all candidates to maybe lose a couple more games this season. So
okay,
I could see Arizona definitely stealing a few of those W's.
All right. Well, let's dive into one of those teams. The next team down the stand, well, I should say up in the standings above Arizona was maybe the most surprising down spiraled team from last season. Things kind of fell apart for the St. Louis Blues, and they end up finishing 6th in the Central with only 81 points. And yeah, we saw Craig Berube just kind of struggle to find the right combinations. The goaltending wasn't good, and losing Ville Husso from the year before kind of bit them harder than I think they thought it would.
Ooh, did it ever?
And this team has really struggled to find their identity since Alex Pietrangelo left. I'm like, is that an unfair statement?
I don't think it's unfair. They really have played. I mean, it's clear they played like a different team, right? I mean, they brought in a few new defensemen, right? They bring in Torrey Krug, Justin Falk. They, revamped their blue line there a couple of years ago, and then last year they, bring in Nick Leddy, and it hasn't looked the same, right? They were a very tough team to play against on the back end, right? They would manhandle you, push you around, and obviously we saw that translate into a Vegas victory, right? Between Martinez and Pietrangelo, they were a tough defensive pair to play against, and White Cloud right on that third pairing. So clearly, that model of success that St. Louis had, translated here to Vegas. But I think St. Louis lost their identity a little bit with the departure of Pietrangelo, as you mentioned, and they just haven't been able to bring in the right personnel to replace them and kind of find it, because I think they wanted to transition to a faster, younger game, and really that wasn't St. Louis's bread and butter. And I think they're finding it difficult to transition when they still have some of the, I don't know if you want to call them old guns, guys like Brandon Saad and Braden Shen that still kind of play that rougher style.
Yeah, and they're not exactly light on how many years are left on their contract. Yeah, Braden Shen with 5 years left, Saad with 3 years left. And then they go out. I mean, really, they go out and get Kevin Hayes. So I feel like that's kind of that and what Kasperi Kapanen coming over last year. They did trade for Jacob Vrana, and they made some changes down the stretch to try and right the ship. I think now you go into camp, no Tarasenko and no Ryan O'Reilly. I think it's going to look a lot different. And I think there's a lot of people that are wondering, is this team going to now take a real step backwards? Like last year was a relatively unexpected full-on step backwards. And I maybe people were predicting, St. Louis might not be as good. They might be a wild card competition. They could miss the playoffs, but I don't think that anybody really was thinking, St. Louis is going to be pretty bad. And they kind of fell much quicker than we thought. Now they're going to run it back essentially with the younger players that they have. I did see something, who was it, said that they thought that Jake Neighbors was the most underrated player in the NHL. So we'll see if that holds true. I don't remember where I saw that, but
that's a bold claim.
We'll see if maybe Jake Neighbors for Calder. Maybe that's where we need to go. He had 10 points in 43 games last year and a -19. I doubt he'll be in the Calder conversation, but he could be. He is a rookie, but this St. Louis team just kind of seems like they are desperate to keep something going. So they went out and found the pieces that they could trade for and afford. Like Kevin Hayes, he was a pit. Like Philly just needed to get rid of him. No one else really was going to give them anything for him, so they get Kevin Hayes. Like Kasperi Kapanen, when they pulled him off of waivers, it was like, hey, we just need you to get rid of this money. Jacob Vrana, we all know the issues that he's had, and he's playing. He was traded at the deadline last year, right? Was it at the deadline?
Yeah, a little bit before.
Yeah, and and then you go out and you kind of. It seems like they've just kind of patchworked this thing together, and now I'm just wondering if that will all come together, or are we looking at a team that just isn't going to work? Craig Berube's fired by the end of the year because we need a fresh face or something, and you end up seeing one of these Falk, Krug, Parayko, somebody getting dealt and trying to shake things up.
Boy, that's a good question, right? I mean, I honestly think, for one, you look at Ryan O'Reilly leaving, right? His leadership is gone. He was a big part of the Stanley Cup winning team, this identity of this Blues team. And so they've kind of lost another piece of their I don't want, whatever you want to call it, old core. And again, that goes back towards shifting towards younger players, right? And so when you look at guys like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, those are guys I want to see step up a little bit more. Kyrou last year was pretty good. I didn't mind his play, but Robert Thomas just looked absent at times, and he had a very up and down season, and it was clear you could see him moving up and down the lineup at times, and never really found stability on any line, because I honestly think it was because he just couldn't seize the opportunity, right? He got paid his money, and some players just they get the contract and they can't keep it going, right? But
yeah, you think you need to keep getting better, and then you actually end up getting worse because you're trying to play outside of your game.
Exactly.
And that may have been some of the issue. I also think, it was just so turbulent. People calling for everybody's head. Everybody's getting traded. It was a rough season last year. I think that one of the teams that needed a reset the most was the St. Louis Blues.
Well, speaking of, if you want to talk resets, where they really need a reset more than anything is in goal. Jordan Binnington, obviously he's stuck under that contract that no one's going to take, for another 4 years at $6 million. So, this will be like make it or break it here for Binnington, because my guess is that at the end of this contract, are you going to buy him out? Well, after this year, yeah, maybe, because he's got a full no trade clause. It's just he submits an 18-team trade, list next season. But, again, who's going to really trade for him, right? You'd have to package a first-round draft pick to get rid of him, and maybe more.
Yeah, if they bought him out, they would have a 500 next year. They would have a cap hit of $555,000 for 24-25, 1.5, 3.5, 2.
Yeah, and with the cap hit going up, that's more than palatable, I think, to reset. But the other question is, again, you'll still have to go out and pay somebody to come in and fill that. But I honestly think they would end up, you could go in free agency and find somebody better than him at this point. And really, maybe a lot of the reasons why we talked about these forwards and defensemen not playing up to their potential, or not really having it last year, is because when you don't have confidence in the guy in the net, sometimes you hold the stick a little tighter. Sometimes you're not going to go up there and pinch, at times when normally you would go up there and maybe make a play on the puck. And a lot of that can translate to, just slower feet. You're not moving as quick. And, of course, puck's going back the other way. And, again, goals are going in when they probably shouldn't. So, again, I'm not Joel Hofer. I thought he looked good last year in limited action. But is he the answer? I don't know if I'm ready to say that.
Yeah, is he going to create more competition than like a Ville Husso did? No, probably not. And Jordan Binnington really couldn't handle it when Husso was there. It's not like the competition made Binnington much better. He still had a pretty bad season 2 years ago when the team was better.
Yeah, and they don't really have anybody else in the minors that's ready to go. I mean, they have Malcolm Subban, but he's not an NHL goalie anymore, in my opinion. So
was he ever?
Well, yeah, there's that opinion too, and. So really you're kind of stuck with what you got, and you hope that maybe, Joel Hofer takes that next step and maybe develops a little bit more and a little quicker than expected and is ready to take over, because, man, if they could get a little bit of stability and a little bit better play out of either one of these goaltenders next season, that could translate very, very well to a lot of these forwards and defensemen up front there, because you know what? Personally, I like the addition of Kevin Hayes. I like the addition of Jacob Vrana, especially given he's in a contract year and he wants to go out and prove it. Like, hey, you know what? I know I've had some off-ice issues in the past, and that's the reason Detroit got rid of me, and I was jettisoned from Washington. But you know what? I can still score goals, right? So maybe he goes out and he has himself a 30-goal year, plays for a big contract, because this is basically going to be it for him, I think, to get a big contract. So maybe this works out very, very well for St. Louis, given that they lost the goal scoring of Tarasenko.
All right, I like it. Yeah. How do you have St. Louis panning out this year?
Personally, I think they're going to kind of probably fall right around where they were before, just a little below 500.
Yeah.
Maybe 80, 85 points, somewhere in that range. But I just don't think there's enough on the back end for me to feel great about this team.
Yeah. In order for St. Louis to make the playoffs, and it's not insane to think, goaltenders have had where they struggle for a 2 seasons, and then they find themselves again and have another good year. Just looked at the Florida Panthers. And I think, maybe Jordan Binnington, if he can have a return to that 910, even a 905 save percentage, I think St. Louis could find themselves in playoff contention again. Everything kind of went wrong for them last year. Do we see St. Louis pull a Calgary Flames and have a lot of things go right for them? A lot of guys have career years, and suddenly St. Louis looks like they're a much better team. So I think there is a scenario, given that several teams in this division have gotten worse. I think there's a chance that St. Louis finds themselves again. But I think ultimately it's kind of a fool's gold kind of thing. I don't think Binnington is the long-term solution anymore. I think a lot of their defensemen are on the wrong side of 30, and again, they're just too patchworked together, and that this may need to maybe not a full rebuild, because you still have Kyrou and Thomas, and there's still some nice pieces here, but maybe a refresh of some of these veteran players that just need to kind of get moved out to really change the look of this team. But I think maybe one more shot at the playoffs for this particular group is not out of reach.
Yep, that's not out of the realm of possibilities, for sure.
All right, let's do one more team here, and that team is the Nashville Predators. They maybe have made the most changes out of any team in this division from the guys that left and how long those guys had been here, especially just in the last 12 months. The changes that have been made there have been pretty drastic. Just looking at Nashville's roster right off the bat, how are you feeling about this team?
Worried. I mean, I should say that worried from a forward group perspective, right? I think they've still got a ton of talent on the back end. I love the addition of Tyson Barrie there. And we all know UC Saros is a Vezina goaltender, right? He's going to be phenomenal. But look, I get it. You had to make some changes with this forward group, right? Because it just wasn't working. Matt Duchene, did you have to get rid of him? I don't know. But again, having that cap space freed up, is always a nice thing. But really bringing in Ryan O'Reilly and Gustav Nyquist to kind of replace Johansson, Duchene, and maybe find, that enough to bring in some veteran guys to bring in a little bit of leadership for this team, right? Because these two guys are good leaders to have in the locker room, and I think that'll definitely be helpful. But, I think Nyquist is still fast enough, but Ryan O'Reilly has kind of slowed down a little bit.
You're going to have to put him in a particular role.
Right.
Give him the right role and he can be successful. Are there enough talented players around him on the roster to be able to put him in that role, or are you going to have to put him into a position to be a different type of player and then he'll fail and score 8 goals again?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, or I should say,
or 12 goals. I guess it was 12 goals. Sorry, 12 goals.
Yeah. But so the bigger question is, now that they're making this shift to basically getting younger and they're trying to play a different style of hockey, because we know what Barry Trotz's hockey is, right? It's going to be defensive focused, hard to play against. Are these younger guys like Yakov Trenin and Philip Tomasino, are these the guys to do it, right? Are they going to take the next step and be able to play that type of
I don't know. I would say that, yes, Barry Trotz is the general manager, but Andrew Brunette has kind of proven that he's going to be a little bit more offensively heavy. He's going to push so. He's going to push the he's going to push the boundaries offensively, and I would think that yes, Trotz has been that way as a coach. And the vast majority of his coaching has come from an era where it paid off to be that way. It's not paying off the same way, at least in the regular season, to play that way. And I wonder if this is a very interesting offensive scheme that this team kind of plays. But also, given the personnel, they don't have a lot. Like, you don't look up and down that forward group and go, oh, well, that guy's good for 30 goals. That guy's good for 25. Like, there's a few who might, crack
Philip
open.
Forsberg, and that's it.
Right. Yep. That's Philip Forsberg, and I think I had him as my third or fourth highest, most overrated player in the NHL. So
Something like that, yeah.
19 goals last year. I guess, he's a 30-goal scorer, but we'll see. After this injury, he's still on IR. We'll see how he walks into the year, or skates into the year, rather. But, I mean, it's all going to be UC Saros, like you said. Like, can Saros carry this team and get them into the playoffs? I mean, they'd be an interesting team to go up against in the playoffs because they have a lot of depth. I guess maybe they when you look at them, you go, well, they could pull off a Seattle Kraken kind of vibe where, a bunch of guys score 15 to 20 goals. That would probably be the most likely scenario if they were going to get into the playoffs. A whole bunch of really good top to bottom, like a whole bunch of second and third line guys. Really not much in terms of first line guys other than Forsberg.
Well, what I'm interested more than anything else is, at what point at this season, because I heard the rumors last year, and I always say where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So typically, there's a little bit of truth to some of these rumors, and a guy like UC Saros, right? We heard his name around the trade, bait boards, last year, and so I kind of wonder if at some point, right, it's just not working out. The team's kind of just middling or even towards the bottom of the division. At what point maybe do you say, let's go ahead and pull a trigger on trading Saros and see if we can't, kick this rebuild off and, see if we can't get some bigger assets because.
Well, I don't know if you're going into that mode with Yossi and Forsberg locked up long term. I don't know you're going down that road.
I mean, you can only buy out or retain salary for so many guys, I think, at some point. And so, obviously, Trotz picked the guys he wanted to. I don't think you want to buy out Forsberg, Duchesne, and Johansson. So
no, I'm saying you want to keep them. And given that they are a part of their team and a part of their long-term plan, I don't see a scenario where Saros gets traded at all.
But here's the thing, though. He's, a year, 2 years from free agency. What if he says, I'm not willing to sign an extension next summer?
Yeah, but then you deal with that next. I don't think you're dealing with that now.
Okay.
I don't think you're dealing with it now. I think you've got to see. You're more trying to figure out what you have, right? Like, what does your team look like now that you've jettisoned a couple of the Johansson and the Duchesne, and you're allowing for these younger guys to take a bigger role? Your Cody Glass, he kind of a late bloomer. He was Vegas's first draft pick, and he had never had more than 12 points in a year, and he had 35 last year. Can he take another step and show that he's maybe a top six forward? And there's enough here to where you could see them pushing for the playoffs. I don't think they make the playoffs, but especially with Roman Josi, UC Saros, I mean, those two are good enough to change the complexion of a team. I mean, I see it kind of like the Sharks, but with an actual great goalie from last year. Like, there's enough here to where they maybe could find themselves in a position again where they're right there knocking on the door for the playoffs, which would be similar to last year. They missed the playoffs by 3 points.
All right, this will be interesting.
Yeah, don't know if they got a whole lot better than last year, but maybe I think they're hoping that it's an addition by subtraction. And then adding Ryan O'Reilly, maybe just kind of changing that leadership group. But all right, well, I knew it. I knew that we'd chug through and would get halfway through a division because we can always get talking about them, and we'll just finish up the second half of the Central the next show that we do, which is always fun. Any final thoughts on these four teams, the bottom of the Central?
Boy,
well, do you think Nashville is in the bottom?
So I do. I think Nashville's still going to be in the bottom four. In fact, I think they'll probably. It wouldn't shock me to see kind of Arizona and Nashville sort of flip places, I think, this year. So. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Arizona maybe is the most interesting out of all these four teams because they're almost the team you're like, could you just be good? It would just be more fun if you you were sort of good, because then it would make everything more messy. if they somehow become good, and then you're like, okay, well, should they really leave Arizona, or like, does that make it more tempting for someone to want to bring them to their city? And it would just be fun if they have kind of that like magical little year where they end up beating some expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like it. All right, well, you can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk, and until the next time, next show we'll do the second half of the Central Division, and until then, we'll talk to you guys soon.